let me know whenever you're ready and I get started. All right, so good afternoon, and we'll just jump right into it. It's been about a month or so since we've had our last Frank briefing, and just wanted to give some updates on what's been happening since last month. And so I just want to start off with some notable incidents. And we had our most recent homicide was the homicide that occurred on October 20th of this year on North Pearl Street. And in that incident, an individual was shot and killed inside of that location. And we've since made an arrest in that incident. We've arrested 26-year-old Jonte Warner of Monticello, New York. He was taken into custody yesterday after a traffic stop in the area of North Lake and First Street. At the time of his arrest, he was in possession of a loaded revolver. He's charged with 1 count of murder second, 1 count of criminal possession of weapon second for homicide, and additionally he was charged with another count of criminal possession of weapon second for a loaded handgun that was in his possession at the time of his arrest. On 592 Central Avenue, we had a dog attack investigation. That's the incident in which the pack of dogs attacked the individual. Individual was killed as a result of that attack. Right now, it's still an ongoing case, complex investigation. We're working closely with the district attorney's office on charges in that case, and all of the dogs are still currently at the Mohawk Hudson Humane Society. We had a shooting at Madison Park on Saturday, October 19th of this year at about 4 o'clock in the morning. We responded. There was an individual who was a 20-year-old who was shot in the abdomen, and through the investigation, the detectives determined that Cheek, C-H-E-I-C-K, Diarra, D-I-A-R-R-A, was one of the 2 individuals who exchanged gunfire during that incident inside of the park. He was charged with 1 count of reckless endangerment in the first degree and 1 count of criminal possession of a weapon second. We had a sexual assault arrest on Saturday for an incident that happened on Saturday, September 14th of this year. Officers responded to 6 Mile Park for a report of a sexual assault. Officers learned that a victim, a female, was inside of a vehicle at the time of the assault. She was able to free herself from the vehicle and seek help. On October 10th of this year, Danielle Perkins was arrested in connection with that sexual assault. And he was charged with 1 count of sexual abuse third, 1 count of rape first, 1 count of rape third, and 1 count of endangering the welfare of a child. Had a shooting at Washington Park on October 12th of this year, right around 2 o'clock in the morning. On duty Albany police officers and Albany firefighters were on separate calls, and they heard what sounded like gunshots coming from inside the park near Willett Street. Upon arrival, they observed several individuals fleeing from the area. 21-year-old Tywone Jackson led officers on a foot pursuit, during which he discarded a loaded 9mm handgun. 20-year-old Jawan Giles was observed attempting to get into a vehicle that was stopped in the roadway in the area of Hudson Avenue and Willett. He had in his possession, after he was stopped, a loaded 9mm handgun. And a 16-year-old was found crouched beside a vehicle during the same incident, and after a foot chase, he was taken into custody, and he was in the vicinity of an AR-style assault rifle. Grand Street in Madison, we had an arrest on October 3rd at about 7:30 p.m. Members of our Albany Community Response Unit attempted to stop a group of individuals who were involved in some sort of investigation. They approached, the individuals fled, and they were taken into custody. 21-year-old Jaden Cruz was taken into custody, and he was found to be in possession of a loaded handgun as well as a quantity of heroin. He was charged with 1 count of criminal possession of a weapon third, 1 count of criminal possession of a controlled substance seventh, 1 count of loitering, 1 count of criminal possession of stolen property fourth, And 20-year-old Jafar Arrington was also taken into custody and charged with obstructing governmental administration, second degree. We had a robbery carjacking on October 28th at around 2 a.m. in the morning. 18-year-old Antonio Guay Nup approached a 30-year-old female in the area of Washington and Quail, assaulted her, stole her vehicle. Approximately 1 hour later, the suspect was observed inside the vehicle by officers in the area of Myrtle and South Pine Street, and a traffic stop was initiated. He refused to stop. He eventually exited his vehicle while it was still in motion. He was taken into custody, and he was charged with 2 counts of robbery second, 1 count of grand larceny third, 1 count of unlawfully fleeing a police officer in a motor vehicle, and 1 count of reckless endangerment, second degree. And we also had a stabbing on Lark Street on Thursday, October 24th at about 1:15 in the morning. Officers were on patrol, and they observed a fight in front of Cafe Hollywood. While breaking up the fight, the officer located a 42-year-old male with a stab wound in his neck. Through the investigation, it was determined that the suspect in this case was armed with a knife, was involved in a physical altercation with another person. During the altercation, the victim attempted to intervene, and the suspect in this case recklessly swung the knife around and struck the individual, the victim in this case, in the neck. The suspect was charged with assault third, 1 count of criminal possession of a weapon third, and 1 count of criminal possession in the 4th degree. And one of the common themes that we're seeing in a lot of our notable incidents is that a lot of these arrests were occurring in some of our hotspot areas. And a lot of these arrests they occurred immediately after these incidents were happening. In a lot of these cases, the officers either witnessed the actions as they were occurring, or they actually heard what was happening, and they were able to quickly respond and to resolve these incidents. So it's an example of how deploying our officers in these hotspot areas have allowed us to quickly resolve a lot of these incidents that have been happening. Officers have actually been there, and we were actually able to take some of these individuals into custody during these incidents. And here are the most current stats that we have right now for some selected incidents and selected categories. And you can see in our property crimes, we're continue to be down substantially in all areas. And total Part 1 crimes are the property crimes combined with the crimes against persons that we have, and some of the other violent crimes that we've had that we show on the screen right here. And so we continue to see progress in a lot of our major areas. Our homicides are now down over 30%. You know, we credit hard work from our officers. We credit the diligence in investigating and in bringing some of these individuals into custody and showing that these heinous acts of violence will not go unpunished. And also by community groups who have been extremely active over this year in helping us to address some of the underlying issues that were driving some of the homicides that we're seeing in our city. And of course, we have 2 categories in shootings with our victims and our shooting incidents where we're slightly up. And I just want to talk about those 2 categories just briefly. And so right now we're up 16% in shooting incidents compared to last year, and we're up 15% with shooting victims compared to last year at this time. But it's important to note that last year we had significant decreases in both those categories. Last year with shooting victims, our shooting victims actually declined 25% last year from the previous year. Our confirmed shots fired, our shooting incidents, last year, they declined 27%. So we had some significant decreases last year in those 2 categories. And so when we're looking at where we are in comparison to those incidents, it's not
something that's totally startling to us when we see that we're slightly ahead, because we're comparing them to a period of time when we had some significant decreases, and that's shown in this slide here. So in 2020, as most of you know, and as our community knows, we saw this significant increase, this significant spike in shootings in our city. Shooting victims increased dramatically. Our shootings in our city increased dramatically. Our shooting victims increased dramatically. And so during that period of time, our focus was on putting together strategies to address those, especially those two categories. And so we doubled down on a lot of our gift strategies that we were working with the state, partnering and collaborating with other members of the community, making sure we were giving our officers and our detectives the tools and the resources that they needed to address this startling, at that time, spike in shootings and shooting victims in our city. And as you can see, the trend line has clearly gone down. We're clearly moving in the right direction with those two categories. And when you look at where we are right now compared to our 5-year average in those categories, with shooting incidents in our city, we are actually down 13% compared to the 5-year average. And with shooting victims, we're actually down 18% compared to the 5-year average. And so when we have these slight increases at certain periods of the year, we try to keep it into context, and we try to look at the overall picture to make sure that despite some slight increases right now in those categories, we ask ourselves, are we still trending in the right direction? And clearly, when you look at where we are and where the data is telling us, we are. And in fact, it's my expectation, at the end of this year, that those categories, the end of the year categories, will in all likelihood be decreases from even last year in the numbers that we had, the significant decreases last year. So the message that I'm sending out with those two categories is that we're clearly trending in the right direction. We still have another couple of months to go in this year to work on those categories. We're trending in the right direction, and we're going to continue putting in the work with those. And this illustrates our homicides that I talked about earlier. Clearly we're making some progress with the homicides that we're having in our city, a 35% decrease. You see a lot of cities who are celebrating double-digit decreases in that category. When you look around the country and they're looking at where they are right now year to date, if they have a 10 or 11% decrease in their homicides, they're celebrating and they're doing cartwheels. Well, we're making some significant progress in that area when you're talking a 35% decrease in that category. And moreover, when you look at the homicides committed by firearms, a 46% decrease in those areas. And what's significant about that is we've been saying for the last 2 or 3 years, despite the fact that our homicides have remained pretty stagnant in terms of our numbers over the last 2 or 3 years, we were expecting this to happen. We were expecting at some point for these numbers to come down significantly, because 80% of homicides are committed by firearms. And we know that. But we also knew that we were making some significant progress in addressing firearms-related violence in our city. So it was only a matter of time before we started to see some of the progress we were seeing with overall firearm activity in our city start to become reflected in the amount of homicides that we're seeing in our city. And so we expect this trend to continue. We had some anomalies. We had some outliers our last 3 or 4 years when it came to homicides. We had 1 year where we had 5 or 6 motor vehicle negligent homicides that were included in our homicide rate. We had 1 year where 30 or 40% of our homicides were domestic related or related to individuals who were with intimate partners or close interpersonal relationship type deals. So we were seeing all of these anomalies for all these years. We were seeing all these outliers, and we knew it was just a matter of time before we started to see the work that's been put in from everybody in this community start to become reflected in the homicides that we're seeing in the city. And we expect that trend line to continue as we move forward. And a lot of that is because of taking these guns off the street. 163 guns, illegally possessed weapons, taken off our streets so far this year. I mean, significant. Any one of those weapons could have been a weapon that could have been used to harm or to fatally injure someone in our city. Taking illegally possessed weapons off our streets work. Our officers are doing a very, very good job. They're doing an outstanding job of identifying these individuals who have these illegally possessed weapons, taking these illegally possessed weapons off the streets, and prosecuting those who have them. And it's starting to become reflected in the data and in some of the other violence that we're seeing in our city. And this just shows the 5-year average that I talked about before in terms of some of our major activity. Just to illustrate that in the major categories of shootings that we've had in our city, the trend line is clearly coming down. It's clearly going into the direction that we want it to go. And in fact, I dare say that we are clearly moving to a place where the activity, the illegal activity, the firearms-related activity in our city will be at pre-pandemic levels and even lower. So every shooting that we have in our city is one shooting too many. Every homicide is one homicide too many. Every person that's a victim of a violent crime in our city, that's one person too many. We're not celebrating the fact that individuals still at sometimes in our city are victimized. We understand that. And in our sympathies and our resources and everything that we have go to those victims, those individuals who are victimized in our city. And we don't minimize anyone who's victimized in our city. But the fact of the matter is we're trending in a positive direction. We're trending where we need to go. We had a crisis 4 years ago. It wasn't a crisis that was created by us. It was a crisis that every community in this country had to deal with. And we dealt with it. You know, we understood that it was not going to happen overnight. We knew that this was a long and protracted battle that we had to fight. We knew that it was going to take some time because the issues that were fueling the violence that we saw in 2020 had some deep roots. So we had to make sure that we had the proper players, the proper partners, the proper strategies, the proper support. And when you look at where we were in 2020 and where we are now, we are clearly heading in the right direction. And so I'm very, very proud of the work of our officers, are very, very proud of the work of this community and working with the officers. I'm very, very proud of the support that we got from the mayor's office in making sure that we had the resources and tools to do what needed to be done. And we're looking forward to making sure that these numbers continue in a positive direction. And in terms of hotspot policing, just want to quickly go over this before I turn it over to the mayor. 4 or 5 years ago, we identified some areas of our city that had some heightened levels of activity. Areas where we were seeing violence that was disproportionate to where we were seeing in other areas of our city. And we knew that we had to put some strategies in place to address some of those hotspot areas that we saw. And so now as we look at what's happening in these hotspot areas, this is the Pine Hills area. This shows the Part 1 crimes that we had over the roughly the last month in Pine Hills. And during the last crime briefing, we showed the month previous to these. So this just shows the previous 30 days or so. But as you can see, you know, there's not much going on in these areas. Here's North Swan and Livingston area. Not a whole lot going on in terms of the Part 1 crimes. Got Lark Street, nothing at all during the last 30 days. Got Pearl Street, very little activity. The Madison and Grand area, very little activity. And this just graphically just kind of shows where we are in terms of weekly activity in those areas. And so the takeaway with these hotspots is that the hotspot policing strategies that we put in place have been working. You know, there was a time, you know, a couple of years ago when in those areas that we just highlighted, that's where we're getting all of our complaints. That's where we're getting residents and business owners and others who were saying something needed to be done. We need to address those issues. The criminal activity is too high. Well, we put these things in place. We put some strategies in place. We've worked with those individuals who live and play and who have businesses in those particular areas, and it's worked. And so now as we move forward, we're constantly evaluating and assessing activity in other parts of the area, other parts of the city. So those hotspot areas may shift as activity shifts in our city. But the takeaway is that it works. Hotspot policing works, working with our community to address some of these issues works. And we're excited as we move forward to work with our community to make sure that activity stays low in the existing hotspots and to identify others that may arise and put these same strategies in place and to address it. And with that, I'll turn it over to the mayor.
Thank you, Chief, and thank you for your hard work. I want to congratulate you and this department for continuing to respond to concerns that our residents have rightfully had with respect to violent crime in our city and to continue to move those numbers in the right direction. And I also want to thank Governor Hochul, because what we're showing is that the funding that she has put in place with respect to the GIVE strategies, with respect to anti-violence funding, that our city has certainly benefited from. And probably most importantly, the crime analysis lab that sits right here in this building, we're demonstrating that while people may still choose to bring a gun into our city and commit an act of violence, it is very unlikely that they are going to leave our city not having been arrested and held accountable for that activity. And so we want to continue to get that message out, that we have the tools in place, that we have the workforce in place, that we have a detective's office, and really throughout every rank of this police department, a laser focus on getting people who choose to engage in acts of violence off of our streets. And we will continue that commitment, and we will continue, I believe, to see these trends, because these trends happen when those relatively small percentage of individuals who choose to arm themselves and commit acts of violence are arrested and taken off of our streets, that our streets are safer. So that has been the focus of this department, and that progress has been tremendous. I think the other thing that we had a press conference about yesterday, and I hope that that got covered, and what I'm really trying to separate from our police briefings and what we talk about when we're talking about what this police department is doing is the fact that we also have a significant number of individuals who are homeless, who are suffering from mental illness, substance use disorder, and we need to have strategies to address those issues as well. Because oftentimes when people say that they're concerned about public safety, it's because they saw a homeless person when they were walking down a particular street, or they saw an individual standing at the exit ramp holding a sign, or they saw someone at a bus stop with a grocery cart full of all of their belongings, or because they went to a park and it is unacceptable, but found drug paraphernalia, including needles there. And so that is part of a separate effort that the city is engaged in. It's part of what our neighborhood services department is focused on. It's part of why we are using our opioid settlement money in partnership with the county. And yesterday, we introduced people to the street treatment team from Albany Navigates, who are out making contact with individuals who are experiencing homelessness, who are unstably housed, and directing them to the services that are available and the services that they need to get help. So when we look at the overall quality of life issues that we're hearing about, we are very responsive. And I also am very clear that it's not for us to lay all of that at the feet of our police officers. Our police officers, and we're demonstrating it with these numbers, are continuing to make our city safer, driving down Part 1 crimes, the things that truly make people unsafe. And as the chief said, any victim is one victim too many. And those efforts are working, those strategies are working, and we're going to continue to work to drive down those numbers to make Albany the safest city in America. And I, again, want to thank the chief. I know he's with us a little while longer, but as we transition, this department is demonstrating that it has not taken its eye off the ball. I was asked by some reporters with the announcement of the chief leaving, was I worried that crime was going to increase or that there was going to be a loss of focus, and I don't have that concern at all. We have an incredible command staff. We have a committed workforce, and I am confident that we will continue to see these numbers trend in the right direction to keep our community safer. With that,
I think I heard you say that people who come into the city and commit a crime are likely to get arrested. I'm wondering if you have a demographic breakdown of the people who are committing crimes in the city coming from outside the city, and conversely, are the people who are victims of crimes city residents, or are they coming into the city being victims?
you know, I don't like to look at it, I mean, I said it a little facetiously, but because we've had a few of these more recent crimes where there were individuals who traveled into the city of Albany. I think making it clear that we want for anyone who is going to engage in violence, whether they live here or not, to recognize the tools and resources that we have. And that there are also resources in place for individuals to get help. Part of our GIVE strategy is to work with people who are likely to be shooters or likely to be shot, and offer them, whether it's housing, workforce development, jobs, whatever their needs might be, so that they can choose a different path. And so, that's the work that we do, and we have seen the challenges. I think the reason that I talk about Albany is that because we are the largest city in the region, because this is where all of the social services reside, because this is where virtually every mental health, group home, halfway house, all of those services are located in the city of Albany, that I want to ensure that as a region, we recognize that when we're talking about homelessness and when we're talking about mental health issues and drug addiction, we are talking about people who are coming from all over. We unfortunately had a woman who walked down Central Avenue and broke the windows of several businesses, clearly suffering from some sort of mental health crisis, who was not only not from the city of Albany or the county of Albany, but was from quite a distance away, but had come here. We have people who are literally given bus tickets to come to Albany because communities say, we don't have the resources to help you. Here's a bus ticket, go to Albany. And so I say that not by way of saying we need to, lock the doors and throw away the key, but I say that by way of saying that all of us have to recognize that this is an issue. And that when those who grumble, oh, this is happening in Albany, they need to realize it could be their next door neighbor's son who's suffering from substance use disorder and is now homeless and on the streets here in the city of Albany. We all have to own this, and we all have to ensure that we're bringing the resources to bear to address those underlying issues.
Is there a concern at all that the migrants at the end of the year will kind of go into the homeless community in Albany? So
we're really working very closely on that issue. I am really pleased to know that the overwhelming majority, I believe that the county announced something like 95% of asylum seekers who have come into our community now have work authorization. And so that means that they have the ability to legally work, to pay the rent, and to establish themselves and continue on whatever path they're on, whether they're ultimately successful as asylum seekers and remain in our community. And so I think that that is a very positive sign, and it's far easier to address housing when people are able to be stably employed. And the folks that are coming here from wherever they're coming from to a person, they want to work. And so that's very encouraging, and there is such a huge need. We still have shortages, as we know, at our healthcare facilities, our restaurants. The construction industry is booming, and with the, we're expecting that the Livingston Avenue Bridge project is underway. Wadsworth Lab, we're expecting is going to start construction, so that's only going to continue. So the more people that we have with work authorizations, I think we'll be able to address a lot of those housing needs because they're able to work.
So Mayor, you showed a lot of optimistic data about violent crimes. What about trends in traffic crimes or pedestrian safety? What does that look like, and what is the city doing?
So we're right now part of a region-wide Vision Zero plan that is being created that we believe will make us far more competitive to attract federal dollars to continue to do pedestrian safety measures. And so I'm awaiting, I have not yet seen the final design or proposed design for Central Avenue, but that's our next traffic calming project that has funding tied to it. It already is in and has received an award to actually do that work. And I fully expect for us to also be competitive as we look at Washington Park, because again, that plan is complete. We've done the traffic studies. There's a plan in place. We've put some temporary measures in place, but we really want that to get funded as well. That's going to cost between $5 and $10 million, and so that's the next project that we're going to be seeking funding for. And we just continue to do this work. It is tremendously. It's expensive. It requires changes to infrastructure. It requires changes in people's habits, and so thus the 25-mile-an-hour speed limit, speed humps, the school zone cameras, and using those tools as we continue to invest in those infrastructure changes.
Mayor, were you surprised that 13,000 people were ticketed for speeding through school zones? And what will the city do with that money, and how much have you earmarked in the budget?
I was appalled. That's only 4 school zones. We're going to have 20. I was appalled. I really had hoped that the work that we did with signage, with a warning period, that we would not see those levels. My budget director told me to expect those levels based on what they saw in New York City when they first implemented speed cameras. But then in New York City, they saw a steep decline. So with respect to that funding, we have a pretty large funding amount, revenue amount in our 2025 budget for next year. But then when you look at our multi-year planning, we see that number fall off pretty precipitously. I want it to go down as quickly as possible. We want people to slow down.
I would imagine that money will plug some serious holes in the budget.
Well, look, I don't ever want to rely on fines with respect to making sure that I balance my budget. We want people to comply. And so while we look at some of the funding challenges associated with the pedestrian changes that we're making and what we'd like to do in Washington Park, this gives us some breathing room to move a little faster with respect to potentially implementing some of those plans if that revenue is there.
Mayor, you mentioned GIVE earlier. Recent GIVE data shared by the governor's office showed that Albany was one of the only upstate municipalities with an increase in shooting incidents compared to a year ago. Why isn't that funding making the same impact here in Albany?
Well, again, I think to the chief's point, we had a very steep decline the year before. And so that increase is on a number that had been pretty greatly reduced. And so as we look at the 5-year numbers, as we look at where we are, certainly compared to 2020, that would still be a negative number. It's still too many. And we want to ensure that we're doing all that we can. And again, working on the GIVE strategies. One of the challenges that we've seen this year is that the GIVE strategies are really focused on those who we know are involved, for example, in activity that might lead to them being in possession of a gun or potentially being a victim. And many of the shootings that we've seen this year haven't fit that description. They've been interpersonal disputes among people, some of whom have never really been involved or on our radar, so to speak, with respect to being involved in violence. And so, I was at a meeting down in Baltimore with mayors who are part of Mayors Against Illegal Guns. And it was interesting to talk to, for example, the mayor of Allentown, Pennsylvania, similar in size. And what he and I both shared was that we can tell the story behind each and every homicide in our city. While the numbers and the percentages none of it is acceptable, we know the story behind each and every homicide, as opposed to, for example, we were in Baltimore, where for decades they've had 300 plus homicides every year. And so, when we look at that and we look at what's driving it, it doesn't necessarily always fit the GIVE strategies. What I do know is that when we were seeing shootings that were associated with group violence, associated with, some people in the media like to call it gangs, other people call them groups. But when we were seeing that, the GIVE strategies worked to really drive down those numbers. And I know we had a pandemic in the middle of it, but I believe if you look at what happened between, I think it was 2018 and 2019, is either 2017 to 2018 or 2018 to 2019, we saw a huge decline. And that was GIVE strategies working.
There have been calls for a higher tech camera system to be installed by the city and the department instead of having to rely on business cameras to catch crime. Is there any conversation around that item?
We have a combination. So we have continued to deploy cameras throughout the city, and we have funding in our budget for it. This is not a budgetary issue. It really is a capacity issue. Post-COVID, we had a very significant delay in actually even getting the equipment because of the shortage in chips. And so we're continuing, though, to purchase those cameras. We have a vendor. We identify locations, and they're getting those deployed. When you deploy a camera and it's within the city network, I know people get frustrated because it feels like it takes too long. I get frustrated, but oftentimes we'll go to install a camera and there won't be enough of an electrical source for Wi-Fi, right? So it's not just popping up a camera like you install your Ring camera on your front door. These are more complicated. They're networked. The data is stored on the cloud. But I'm satisfied that we're moving as quickly as we can with those cameras, and we truly appreciate the public's help and assistance, because even when we have an angle from our cameras, from an evidentiary standpoint, if there are other cameras in the area and in the vicinity, certainly can help with closing a case faster.
In regard to the dog attack case, Chief, you said earlier that you are working with the DA's office on charges. So should we expect charges that will come from this case?
I would anticipate some charges. I don't know what they are yet, but working very closely with the DA's office on this one. Complicated case. A lot of factors involved in it, but confident that some charges will ultimately be filed.
And will the charges coincide with the city code violations? Because to my understanding, they did violate with the 5-pet rule.
At this point, I don't know. Okay. Yeah, but they're working very closely with the DA's office, though. So whatever, I'm confident that they'll come down with some charges that are applicable and that bring justice in this case.
Chief, in regards to the most recent homicide, can you provide any information on what the relationship was between those two men?
I don't know. It was another senseless act of violence, though. I mean, it was one of these cases where we have individuals who are they're inside of this this common area of this apartment, and we know that there was some interaction between them. We know that they had some verbal interaction, and then there was the shooting. I mean, just senseless. And we consistently see it with a lot of our shootings. So, but I don't know exactly with the relationship.
The suspect taken into custody in the city?
Yes. Yes.
In regards to that kind of the weekend that we had multiple incidents that happened 2 weeks ago, you know, I did speak with some community members who say that they are scared in their neighborhoods, and you know, they are nervous. How are you hoping to, I guess, deal with that perception of fear when the data says otherwise?
And that's a difficult thing because you know, we can put out all the data that shows that it's going down and that crime is going down, but people feel what they feel. And so we understand that that's a big part of policing. That's a big part of keeping this community safe is accepting, acknowledging that people have a fear of crime and a perception of crime in certain instances, even if the data is showing otherwise. But I think the way to deal with that is by having these sorts of forums, getting information out there, getting correct information out there, accurate information, getting out there timely, making sure that we have officers who are out in the field who are sharing this information with those who may feel a little uneasy about some of these things, and then making sure that that folks who feel this way know that, for example, up in the Madison Park area where we had some most recent acts of violence in that area, that's one of our hot spots. We've had officers in that area. We've been monitoring the activity in that area all summer. The activity has been basically nothing all summer. And when that senseless act of violence occurred, officers were right there because we had strategically put those officers there because it's a hot spot. They heard what happened. Our response time was instant. So they were able, because of our strategies that we have in our department of identifying areas that we may have some heightened possibilities of activity, having officers in that area, giving them the resources, support they needed, and when it happens, they're right there. They're right there to make an arrest. They're right there to render aid, and it shows the community that, you know, we can't prevent every senseless act of violence. But what we can do is make sure that we have our officers there to deter what we can, and if it does happen, have them there to take these individuals into custody. We've seen this consistently in our hotspot areas and as well as other areas of the city. And in the weekend that you're talking about, it was the same way, you know, making sure that we bring justice to those when it happens, but just continue our efforts in those areas.
Chief, how's staffing in the department, and how are recent recruitment events?
Staffing is still low, and it's, you know, I think we're 60 plus of sworn vacancies at this point, and it's remarkable that this department is able to provide the level of service that it's providing to this city, despite a 20% plus reduction in the amount of personnel resources to address it. You know, we understand that everybody wants a cop on the corner. We understand that everybody wants to see a police officer every 10 minutes riding down their street. And we try, but it's just not possible when you have that fewer officers to deal with to handle these things. But we don't use it as an excuse. You know, we know that we have fewer resources to work with, and so we put some things into place to adjust and to make sure that we're flexible and versatile despite some of these challenges, and it's reflected in our numbers. You know, despite having fewer officers, you know, we've got officers in hotspot areas that are hearing stuff go down, and they're taking people into custody when it happens. You know, despite having fewer officers, you know, we're out there bringing our homicide closure rate well above the national average. National average is somewhere around 50%. Our homicide closure rate in this city is 85% plus. And I'm confident that by the time this year is over, we're going to probably be 100%. I mean, it's remarkable considering the fewer personnel resources that we have, testament to the commitment to that these officers have to this community, commitment to doing more despite having less, a commitment to working more when they're tired, and we just need a couple of more hours, and they give it to us. But we're also cognizant of the fact that we can't beat our officers down either. So we have some systems in place to make sure that we're not overworking our officers and we're not putting them into a place where they can cause harm to themselves or to their own health and wellness or to anybody in the community. But great job on the part of our officers.
Chief
Last
and Mayor,
question, last
Chief and
question.
Yes, ma'am.
we recently spoke with Sheriff Apple, who told us that there's a good reason to assume that there is migrant gang activity in the capital region. Is the city aware? How is the city hoping to address this?
Well, we're always monitoring for any type of activity, whether it's a migrant activity or whether it's neighborhood, whether it's folks who were born and raised in the community who are doing things, or whether it's like the mayor said, folks who are coming from the Bronx or from other parts of our city or from other states. So we have mechanisms in place to identify any types of activity. And so, I mean, if someone's worried about migrant activity, that's fine. We're worried about that, but we're also worried about other types of activities in the city, and whether it's migrants or whether it's long-term residents or not, we're going to deal with it. We're going to identify individuals, whoever they are, who are involved in illegal activities or quality of life issues in our city. We're going to identify them. If they're involved in arrestable offenses, we're going to arrest them, and we're going to bring justice to anybody who's impacted by some of these acts of violence that they may occur. So